The skyline of New York glittered beneath Ethan Calloway's penthouse, a sea of towering ambition and relentless energy. The city never slept, much like him. From this height, everything appeared orderly, meticulously controlled, just the way he preferred. And yet, despite the power he wielded, despite the empire he had built from nothing, Ethan Calloway had never felt more alone. The walls of his penthouse were lined with sleek, modern furniture, tasteful, expensive, impersonal. A large fireplace crackled softly in the background, but the warmth never quite reached him. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, whiskey in hand, staring out at the city that both admired and feared him. The media called him ruthless, a king in the tech world, an untouchable mogul who crushed competitors with a single decision. They weren't wrong. Calloway Industries dominated the market, its innovations shaping the digital age. But with great success came great isolation. Business partners were wary, employees walked on eggshells, and personal relationships, well, those had been abandoned long ago. Except for Jamie. His 8-year-old son was the only thing that truly mattered, the only person who saw him as more than a billionaire. But even Jamie was slipping away from him. Ethan ran a hand through his jet-black hair, exhaustion weighing on him heavier than the late hour. He checked his phone. No messages from the driver yet. Jamie was supposed to be home by now. A pang of guilt twisted in his chest. He hadn't been there when his son took his first steps with the help of a walker. He hadn't been there during Jamie's hospital stays. He barely knew his son's favorite book, his favorite toy. Jamie had been raised by nannies, cared for by doctors, and Ethan, despite all his wealth, couldn't seem to connect with him. His marriage had been a disaster. Julia had never wanted the quiet life, the family life. She had wanted the lifestyle, the name. When Jamie was born with cerebral palsy, she had checked out almost immediately. It had taken years of lawyers, threats, and settlements, but in the end, Ethan had been granted full custody. Not that Jamie would have noticed the difference. Ethan had been absent even when he was there. Tonight, he had promised himself he would change that. A sharp knock at the door broke his thoughts. Miranda Wells, his assistant, stepped in, poised as ever, her blonde hair sleek, her navy suit tailored to perfection. If Ethan was a machine, Miranda was the one who kept the gears turning. "Jamie's driver hasn't checked in," she said without preamble, her voice calm but edged with concern. Ethan's grip on his whiskey glass tightened. "Where is he?" Miranda hesitated. "I just got off the phone with the driver. He was caught in traffic. When he arrived at the school, Jamie wasn't there." The room seemed to tilt. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears. "What do you mean he wasn't there?" The school confirmed Jamie was waiting outside, but by the time the driver arrived, he was gone. Ethan slammed his glass down onto the marble counter, the sound shattering the careful control he maintained over his life. "Find him. Now." Miranda was already on it, pulling out her phone, issuing commands. Ethan grabbed his coat and strode toward the elevator. "I'm going myself." The car cut through the streets of Manhattan, rain blurring the neon glow of the city. Every moment that passed twisted the knife deeper in Ethan's chest. Jamie was alone, in a city this ruthless, this unfeeling, and Ethan had let it happen. The driver had last seen him near a small, old-fashioned diner, tucked between high-rises, a relic of the past in a city obsessed with the future. The black Bentley rolled to a stop across the street, and Ethan's sharp eyes scanned the rain-slick pavement. Then he saw him. Through the rain-streaked windows of the diner, a small boy sat curled up in a wheelchair, his dark hair damp, his oversized coat hanging from his thin frame. But he wasn't alone. A woman was crouched beside him, her auburn hair pulled into a messy ponytail, her expression warm as she handed him something, a steaming plate of food. Jamie took a bite, and for the first time in what felt like years, Ethan saw his son smile. Something inside him shifted. He had spent millions hiring the best caregivers, therapists, and teachers for Jamie. He had built an empire to ensure his son would never want for anything. And yet, a waitress in a rundown diner had just done what Ethan had failed to do for years: make his son feel safe. He watched as the woman, Lena Carter, according to the neon name tag on her uniform, tucked a napkin into Jamie's lap, laughing softly as she spoke to him. Jamie responded, his eyes bright with interest, his small hands moving animatedly. Ethan clenched his fists. Who was this woman? And why did his son look at her like she had just given him the world? Miranda's voice crackled through the car's speaker. "Sir, I pulled the security footage from the school. Jamie must have wheeled himself down the street and ended up there before the rain started." Ethan barely heard her. His eyes were locked on Lena. He didn't believe in fate. He believed in power, in control, in calculated decisions. But as he watched the waitress and his son, something told him this moment would change everything. Lena Carter wiped down the counter, the scent of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filling the small Brooklyn diner. The evening rush had long faded, leaving only a few scattered customers: a trucker nursing a cup of black coffee, an elderly couple sharing a slice of pie, and a college student buried in his laptop. She sighed, stretching her aching shoulders. Another long shift, another night wondering how she'd scrape together rent for her cramped studio apartment. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was the one she had. The jingle of the bell above the door snapped her from her thoughts. A gust of wind rushed in, followed by a small, shivering figure in a wheelchair. Lena frowned, her gaze locking on the boy. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, his dark hair damp from the rain, his thin frame lost in an oversized coat. His hands clutched the wheels of his chair as he hesitated near the entrance, his blue eyes scanning the room with quiet uncertainty. Something inside her tightened. "Hey there, sweetheart," she called gently, stepping around the counter. "You look like you could use some warmth." The boy hesitated, his small fingers gripping the edges of his chair. "I'm waiting for someone," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Lena glanced outside. The rain had picked up, turning the city streets into shimmering pools of light. There was no one in sight. "Why don't you wait inside?" she offered, crouching beside him. "It's warm in here, and I make a mean grilled cheese." The boy's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Really?" "The best in Brooklyn." She held out her hand. "What's your name, sweetheart?" He hesitated, then murmured, "Jamie." "Well, Jamie, let's get you settled." She wheeled him over to a booth near the radiator, draping a clean towel over his shoulders before hurrying to the kitchen. Minutes later, she placed a plate of golden grilled cheese and a steaming cup of tomato soup in front of him. Jamie's eyes widened. "Wow," Lena chuckled. "Told you." She slid into the booth across from him, watching as he took a careful bite. The cheese stretched between his fingers, and his face lit up with delight. "This is really good," he said, his voice full of wonder. Lena grinned. "It's the secret ingredient." "What is it?" "Love." Jamie giggled, a sound that warmed her more than the diner's heater ever could. They talked as he ate, about superheroes and books, about the best flavors of ice cream and the funniest cartoons. He had a sharp wit, his words laced with curiosity and humor beyond his years. But there was something else, too. Something lonely. "Where's your family, Jamie?" she asked softly. He twirled a spoon in his soup, avoiding her gaze. "My dad's supposed to pick me up." Lena frowned. "He left you outside?" Jamie shook his head. "He didn't know. The driver got stuck, so I just came here." Lena's heart clenched. What kind of father let a kid in a wheelchair wander the streets alone? Before she could press further, the bell above the door jangled again. A tall man stepped inside, the air shifting instantly. He was devastatingly handsome, but there was a coldness to him, an edge of power in the way he carried himself. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his sharp jaw set in tension. His eyes, icy gray, piercing, swept the room until they landed on Jamie. Lena stiffened as the boy's face lit up. "Dad!" Jamie wheeled his chair toward the man, who strode forward with long, purposeful steps. The man, Jamie's father, crouched beside him, his strong hands resting on his son's shoulders. "Are you okay?" His voice was low, urgent. Jamie nodded. "I was just waiting, but Lena helped me." He turned toward her, smiling. "She makes the best grilled cheese ever." Lena folded her arms, eyeing the man. "I take it you're the one he was waiting for?" He stood, his gaze locking onto hers. There was something unreadable in his expression, something almost assessing. "Yes," he said smoothly. "I'm Ethan Callaway." The name hit her like a thunderclap. Ethan Callaway. Billionaire. Tech mogul. The man whose company practically owned half of Manhattan. She had seen his face in magazines, heard his name whispered in awe and fear. He was known for his ruthless business tactics, his billion-dollar deals. What was he doing in her diner? Ethan extended a hand. "Thank you for looking after Jamie." Lena hesitated before shaking it. His grip was firm, his skin warm despite the chill outside. "No problem," she said, leveling her gaze at him. "But maybe next time don't leave your kid alone in the rain." Something flickered across his face. Shock? Amusement? "I didn't," he said evenly. "There was a miscommunication." Lena scoffed. "Right." Ethan studied her, his gaze sharp. She had the distinct feeling that not many people talked to him like this. Jamie broke the tension. "Dad, can Lena come work for us?" Lena blinked. "What?" Ethan arched an eyebrow. "What makes you think she'd want to?" Jamie grinned. "She's nice, and she knows how to take care of people. You need more people like that." Lena chuckled, ruffling Jamie's hair. "Thanks, kid, but I think billion-dollar companies need more than grilled cheese skills." Ethan's lips twitched, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen. "Perhaps," he said, "but Jamie has a point." Lena raised an eyebrow. "About what?" Ethan's gaze lingered on her, calculating. "About needing people who care." Lena scoffed. "Well, I'm not a billionaire. I don't have to worry about mergers and acquisitions." Ethan's smirk was faint, but there. "And yet, I think you'd handle it better than most." Lena shook her head, stepping back. "Look, I was just helping out a kid who needed it, that's all." Ethan nodded, but something told her this wasn't the last she'd see of him. Jamie looked up at his father. "Can I come back here sometime?" Ethan's expression softened for the first time that night. "We'll see." Lena smirked. "Anytime, Jamie. The grilled cheese is always on the house." As Ethan led Jamie out into the rain, he turned back once, his eyes lingering on her for a second longer than necessary. Lena watched them disappear into the black Bentley parked outside, her stomach twisting with something she couldn't quite name. She had no idea that tonight would change her life forever. Lena had served all kinds of customers in her years working at the Brooklyn diner, exhausted night shift workers, couples on first dates, even the occasional celebrity slumming it for an authentic experience. But never had she served a billionaire tech mogul and his wheelchair-bound son. And she certainly never expected the encounter to follow her home. The next morning, Lena was still shaking off the odd feeling of last night. Something about Ethan Callaway's gaze had lingered in her mind, like the afterimage of a lightning strike. She wasn't sure if it was intrigue or irritation, maybe both. She threw on her worn sneakers and a faded hoodie before heading to the diner for another shift. Rent was due in a week, and she was still short. No time to dwell on wealthy men with sharp eyes and sharper suits. Ethan Calloway sat in his office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. The usual satisfaction he got from watching his empire hum beneath him was missing. Instead, his mind was filled with images of a rundown diner, the scent of grilled cheese, and a waitress who had looked at him like he was just another overworked father, not the billionaire everyone else feared. "Sir?" Miranda Wells, his ever-efficient assistant, stood at the edge of his office, tablet in hand. He turned, raising an eyebrow. "What is it?" "I ran the background check on Lena Carter, as you requested." Ethan leaned back in his chair, motioning for her to continue. "She's 30 years old, originally from upstate New York. Dropped out of college to care for her mother, who passed away 5 years ago. Been working at the diner ever since. No criminal record, no outstanding debts besides the usual, student loans, late rent payments. She's—" Miranda hesitated, then said, "She's an ordinary woman, sir." Something in Ethan's chest tightened at that. An ordinary woman who had done something extraordinary for his son. He tapped his fingers against his desk. "Contact her. Offer her a meeting." Miranda blinked. "A meeting for what, exactly?" Ethan smirked. "Let's see if she's interested in a career change." Lena had just set down a tray of coffee when she heard her name. "Excuse me, Lena Carter?" She turned to find a woman in a sharp navy suit standing by the counter. The kind of woman who belonged in a boardroom, not a greasy spoon. "Who's asking?" Lena wiped her hands on her apron, eyeing her warily. "Miranda Wells. I work for Ethan Calloway." Lena's stomach twisted. "And?" "He would like to meet with you," Miranda said smoothly, as if billionaires routinely summoned waitresses. "This afternoon, at Calloway Industries headquarters." Lena scoffed. "Yeah, right." Miranda didn't blink. "It's not a joke. Mr. Calloway would like to discuss a professional opportunity with you." Lena folded her arms. "I make minimum wage slinging eggs and coffee. What kind of opportunity could a billionaire possibly have for me?" Miranda smiled, but it was the kind of smile that gave nothing away. "That's for Mr. Calloway to explain. I'd advise you to hear him out." Lena hesitated. Something about this felt surreal, but a part of her, a desperate, practical part, reminded her that she was running out of options. She exhaled. "Fine. Where do I go?" The elevator ride to the top floor of Calloway Industries was the longest 2 minutes of Lena's life. The glass walls offered a dizzying view of Manhattan, a city that had never felt so far out of reach as it did now. When the doors slid open, she stepped into a space so sleek and modern it barely felt real. A receptionist ushered her into a massive office, where Ethan Calloway stood by the window, hands in his pockets, looking every bit the untouchable billionaire. He turned as she entered. "Lena," she crossed her arms, "you know, when most people thank someone, they just send a card." Ethan smirked. "I prefer more direct methods." He gestured to the seat across from his desk. "Sit." Lena hesitated before lowering herself into the plush leather chair, feeling out of place. "All right, rich guy, what's this about?" Ethan leaned forward, his gaze unreadable. "I want to offer you a job." Lena blinked. "Excuse me?" "At Calloway Industries," he clarified. "A position overseeing our corporate charity division." Lena let out a sharp laugh. "You want me to run a charity? I work at a diner." Ethan's expression didn't waver. "I need someone who understands real people. Someone who knows what it means to struggle and still chooses to help anyway. Jamie trusts you. That means something." Her stomach clenched at the mention of Jamie. She had only known the kid for a few hours, but he had already left an impression. Still, this was insane. I don't know anything about business, she said. Ethan steepled his fingers. You know how to take care of people. That's more valuable than you think. Lena stared at him. And what's in it for you? His jaw tightened slightly. I need someone I can trust. The weight of those words settled between them. Lena looked away, her mind racing. This was a ticket out of the cycle she had been stuck in for years, a chance to do something meaningful. But was she really about to accept a job from a man whose world was so different from hers? I need time to think, she said finally. Ethan nodded, as if he had expected that. Take a day. But know this, Lena. I don't make offers twice. Lena swallowed hard. As she left the towering office and stepped back onto the streets of Brooklyn, she realized that no matter what she chose, her life would never be the same again. Lena had served all kinds of customers in her years working at the Brooklyn diner. Exhausted night shift workers, couples on first dates, even the occasional celebrity slumming it for an authentic experience. But never had she served a billionaire tech mogul and his wheelchair-bound son. And she certainly never expected the encounter to follow her home. The next morning, Lena was still shaking off the odd feeling of last night. Something about Ethan Calloway's gaze had lingered in her mind, like the afterimage of a lightning strike. She wasn't sure if it was intrigue or irritation, maybe both. She threw on her worn sneakers and a faded hoodie before heading to the diner for another shift. Rent was due in a week, and she was still short. No time to dwell on wealthy men with sharp eyes and sharper suits. Ethan Calloway sat in his office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. The usual satisfaction he got from watching his empire hum beneath him was missing. Instead, his mind was filled with images of a run-down diner, the scent of grilled cheese, and a waitress who had looked at him like he was just another overworked father, not the billionaire everyone else feared. Sir? Miranda Wells, his ever-efficient assistant, stood at the edge of his office, tablet in hand. He turned, raising an eyebrow. What is it? I ran the background check on Lena Carter, as you requested. Ethan leaned back in his chair, motioning for her to continue. She's 30 years old, originally from upstate New York, dropped out of college to care for her mother, who passed away 5 years ago. Been working at the diner ever since. No criminal record, no outstanding debts besides the usual. Student loans, late rent payments. She's... Miranda hesitated, then said, She's an ordinary woman, sir. Something in Ethan's chest tightened at that. An ordinary woman who had done something extraordinary for his son. He tapped his fingers against his desk. Contact her. Offer her a meeting. Miranda blinked. A meeting for what exactly? Ethan smirked. Let's see if she's interested in a career change. Lena had just set down a tray of coffee when she heard her name. Excuse me, Lena Carter? She turned to find a woman in a sharp navy suit standing by the counter. The kind of woman who belonged in a boardroom, not a greasy spoon. Who's asking? Lena wiped her hands on her apron, eyeing her warily. Miranda Wells. I work for Ethan Calloway. Lena's stomach twisted. And? He would like to meet with you, Miranda said smoothly, as if billionaires routinely summoned waitresses. This afternoon at Calloway Industries headquarters. Lena scoffed. Yeah, right. Miranda didn't blink. It's not a joke. Mr. Calloway would like to discuss a professional opportunity with you. Lena folded her arms. I make minimum wage slinging eggs and coffee. What kind of opportunity could a billionaire possibly have for me? Miranda smiled, but it was the kind of smile that gave nothing away. That's for Mr. Calloway to explain. I'd advise you to hear him out. Lena hesitated. Something about this felt surreal, but a part of her, a desperate, practical part, reminded her that she was running out of options. She exhaled. Fine. Where do I go? The elevator ride to the top floor of Callaway Industries was the longest 2 minutes of Lena's life. The glass walls offered a dizzying view of Manhattan, a city that had never felt so far out of reach as it did now. When the doors slid open, she stepped into a space so sleek and modern it barely felt real. A receptionist ushered her into a massive office where Ethan Callaway stood by the window, hands in his pockets, looking every bit the untouchable billionaire. He turned as she entered. "Lena," she crossed her arms. "You know, when most people thank someone, they just send a card." Ethan smirked. "I prefer more direct methods." He gestured to the seat across from his desk. "Sit." Lena hesitated before lowering herself into the plush leather chair, feeling out of place. "All right, rich guy, what's this about?" Ethan leaned forward, his gaze unreadable. "I want to offer you a job." Lena blinked. "Excuse me?" "At Callaway Industries," he clarified. "A position overseeing our corporate charity division." Lena let out a sharp laugh. "You want me to run a charity? I work at a diner." Ethan's expression didn't waver. "I need someone who understands real people. Someone who knows what it means to struggle and still chooses to help anyway. Jamie trusts you. That means something." Her stomach clenched at the mention of Jamie. She had only known the kid for a few hours, but he had already left an impression. Still, this was insane. "I don't know anything about business," she said. Ethan steepled his fingers. "You know how to take care of people. That's more valuable than you think." Lena stared at him. "And what's in it for you?" His jaw tightened slightly. "I need someone I can trust." The weight of those words settled between them. Lena looked away, her mind racing. This was a ticket out of the cycle she had been stuck in for years, a chance to do something meaningful. But was she really about to accept a job from a man whose world was so different from hers? "I need time to think," she said finally. Ethan nodded, as if he had expected that. "Take a day. But know this, Lena. I don't make offers twice." Lena swallowed hard. As she left the towering office and stepped back onto the streets of Brooklyn, she realized that no matter what she chose, her life would never be the same again. Lena Carter had walked into intimidating places before. Courtrooms after her mother's death, hospital waiting rooms filled with impossible choices, job interviews where the decision had already been made before she even stepped through the door. But nothing compared to the towering glass and steel monolith that was Callaway Industries. She stood outside the main entrance, craning her neck to take in the sheer size of it. It felt like stepping into another universe, one where people wore $1,000 suits and walked like they owned the world. Because in a way, they did. Lena wasn't sure why she was here. She should have laughed off Ethan Callaway's insane job offer and walked away. But here she was, gripping the strap of her second-hand purse, standing at the gates of the empire. "This is stupid," she muttered to herself. And yet, she stepped inside. The moment she walked through the revolving doors, she felt completely out of place. Everything was sleek and modern, with polished marble floors and walls lined with abstract art she didn't understand. A massive glass chandelier hung from the ceiling, refracting light in a way that seemed designed to make people feel small. Employees bustled around her, all in perfectly tailored suits, carrying tablets and talking into Bluetooth earpieces. She felt the eyes of a few of them sweep over her, their gazes flickering with curiosity, and in some cases, disapproval. Lena ignored them, walking up to the sleek white reception desk. The woman behind it barely looked up as she typed on her computer. "I have an appointment with Ethan Callaway," Lena said, gripping the counter. The receptionist glanced at her, lips pursing slightly as she gave Lena's faded jeans and scuffed sneakers a once-over. "Your name?" she asked in a perfectly bored voice. "Lena Carter." A pause. The woman's eyes widened slightly before she quickly masked her surprise. She tapped a few keys, then nodded. "Mr. Calloway is expecting you." The receptionist pressed a button, and a sleek, suited man appeared almost instantly. "Miss Carter," he said smoothly. "Follow me." Lena swallowed and stepped into the elevator, her stomach twisting with nerves as they shot up to the top floor. The office of Ethan Calloway was even more intimidating than the lobby. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the entire back wall, offering a breathtaking view of Manhattan. A massive black desk sat in the center of the room, but Ethan wasn't behind it. Instead, he stood by the window, hands in his pockets, gazing out at the city below like a king surveying his kingdom. The moment she stepped inside, he turned, his piercing gray eyes locking onto her with the same unreadable expression he always wore. "Lena." She folded her arms. "You know, for a guy who owns half of Manhattan, you sure have a lot of free time to summon waitresses to your office." His lips twitched in amusement. "I don't offer jobs to just anyone." She snorted. "Yeah, because I'm so qualified." Ethan walked to his desk, picking up a folder and holding it out to her. "You're more qualified than you think." Lena hesitated before taking it. She flipped it open, eyes scanning the documents inside. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a real job offer. A 6-figure salary. Benefits. A title she barely understood. Director of Community Outreach and Charity Initiatives. She looked up sharply. "You're serious about this?" Ethan nodded. "I told you, I need someone who understands people. Someone who doesn't see everything through the lens of profit margins." Lena laughed, shaking her head. "I don't know the first thing about running a corporate charity. I don't need someone who knows the corporate side. I have people for that. I need someone who knows what it's like to struggle, who actually cares about the people these initiatives are supposed to help." "You do." She exhaled, closing the folder. "And what if I say no?" Ethan studied her for a long moment. "Then you go back to waiting tables and wondering if there's more out there for you." Her stomach twisted. He wasn't wrong. She had been wondering. For years. She hesitated. "I don't want to be a charity case." His gaze hardened slightly. "You're not. I don't do handouts, Lena." A beat of silence stretched between them. Lena's heart pounded as she stared at the folder in her hands. The logical part of her screamed that this was insane, that she was stepping into a world where she didn't belong. But another part of her, one that had been silent for a long time, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the chance she had been waiting for. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked him in the eye. "I'll try it, but don't expect miracles." Ethan's lips curved into something that almost resembled a smile. "Neither do I." By the time Lena left Calloway Industries, her head was spinning. She had a job, a real job. She barely noticed the curious stares of the employees as she made her way through the lobby. The receptionist looked up again as she passed, this time with something that almost resembled respect. Lena wasn't sure how she felt about that. She stepped onto the sidewalk, sucking in a deep breath of city air. Her phone buzzed. A text from her landlord, reminding her that rent was overdue. She looked back up at the towering building behind her, at the logo of Calloway Industries shining against the New York skyline. This was it, her new reality. And somehow, she had a feeling her life would never be the same again. Lena stood outside the towering building of Calloway Industries the next morning, gripping the strap of her bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had barely slept, her mind tangled with uncertainty and self-doubt. What was she thinking? She was a waitress. What did she know about running charity initiatives? But the alternative was going back to the diner, where she would scrape together tips and keep running on the hamster wheel of survival. Maybe, just maybe, this was the break she never saw coming. Squaring her shoulders, she took a deep breath and stepped inside. The morning was a blur of introductions and paperwork. Miranda Wells, Ethan's assistant, was efficient, cool, and at times a little terrifying. She handed Lena a tablet loaded with company information and schedules, guiding her through the sleek corridors of Callaway Industries with the precision of someone who had long perfected her role. "I've scheduled a lunch with Mr. Callaway and his son at 1 o'clock, Miranda informed her as they walked. "Jamie will be joining you both. He's quite excited." Lena's steps faltered. "Jamie?" Miranda finally glanced at her, something softer flashing behind her professional mask. "He doesn't warm up to people easily. The fact that he asked for you says a lot." Warmth spread through Lena's chest. She had only spent one evening with Jamie, but something about the kid had left an imprint on her. Maybe because, despite his challenges, he still had that spark of curiosity and humor. By the time lunch rolled around, she was led to Ethan's private dining room, an intimate, well-lit space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. When she stepped inside, Jamie's face lit up. "Lena!" Jamie beamed, maneuvering his wheelchair with practiced ease. Lena grinned, instantly relaxing. "Hey, kid, ready for some top-notch billionaire cuisine?" Jamie wrinkled his nose. "I told Dad to order grilled cheese." Ethan, seated at the head of the table, arched an eyebrow. "Apparently, you make the best in Brooklyn." Lena smirked as she took a seat beside Jamie. "High praise. You better not ruin your taste buds with all this fancy food." Jamie giggled while Ethan watched the exchange, an unreadable expression on his face. The usual cool, impenetrable businessman seemed slightly less intimidating in this setting, more human even. Lunch passed in an easy rhythm. Jamie was a chatterbox, asking Lena about everything from her favorite superhero to whether she thought dinosaurs were still alive somewhere. He was convinced they had to be. She answered every question with patience and amusement, glad for the distraction from the strangeness of her new reality. Then, when Jamie turned his attention to drawing on his tablet, Ethan finally spoke. "He likes you." Lena looked up, meeting his gaze. "I like him too." Ethan studied her for a moment before glancing at his son. "It's rare." Lena tilted her head. "For people to like me?" His lips twitched in something almost resembling a smirk. "For Jamie to trust someone. His mother wasn't around much. And I've never been—" He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the edge of his glass. "I haven't always been the most present father." Lena leaned back in her chair. "Well, you're here now." Ethan's gaze flickered with something she couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe. Vulnerability. "I don't always know how to connect with him." Lena softened. She saw it now, the thing people probably missed about Ethan Callaway. Beneath the steel walls, beneath the reputation, was a man who was trying, a man who had built an empire but somehow felt powerless when it came to his own son. "He's a great kid," Lena said gently. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be there." Ethan exhaled, a small nod his only response. But it was enough. The rest of the afternoon was packed with meetings. Lena sat in on discussions about budgets, outreach programs, and upcoming fundraising events, most of which went over her head. But she listened, taking notes, trying to absorb the fast-paced world of high-powered philanthropy. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, she was exhausted. She had just stepped into the elevator, ready to go home and process everything, when a small voice called out, "Lena, wait!" She turned just as Jamie wheeled into the lobby, his arms pumping to push himself forward quickly. Lena stepped out, concern flickering across her face. "Jamie, everything okay?" He nodded, slightly out of breath. I wanted to ask something." She crouched down, resting her hands on her knees. "Shoot." Jamie hesitated, glancing toward the glass doors where Ethan's driver waited in the sleek black Bentley. "Would you come over sometime?" Lena blinked. "Come over?" "To our place," Jamie clarified. "Not for work, just to hang out. Maybe make grilled cheese?" Lena's heart squeezed. She could see it now. Jamie had plenty of money, plenty of luxuries, but not many people. Not the kind who stuck around for anything more than a paycheck. She smiled. "I'd love to, kid." Jamie grinned wide, then turned to head out to the waiting car. As Lena stood there watching him leave, she felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was something else entirely. Lena walked into Callaway Industries the next morning, determined to prove she belonged. She had spent the night reading everything she could about corporate philanthropy, nonprofit management, and how billion-dollar companies handled charitable initiatives. Half of it was jargon she barely understood, but she was willing to learn. What she hadn't expected was the resistance she would face. Her first official meeting as Director of Community Outreach and Charity Initiatives was a disaster. Seated at the long, sleek conference table in one of the company's high-rise boardrooms, Lena felt like an outsider. Around her, men and women in expensive suits flipped through reports, barely acknowledging her presence. Bryce Langley, the CFO of Callaway Industries, sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. He was a man in his early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and an air of controlled arrogance. He was the kind of person who lived in numbers, not people. "This is Lena Carter," Ethan announced, standing at the front of the room. "She will be leading our community outreach and charity initiatives." A brief silence filled the room before Bryce spoke, his voice smooth but edged with doubt. "With all due respect, Mr. Callaway, Mississippi Carter doesn't have any formal experience in corporate philanthropy. Given the scale of our foundation, I would have assumed we'd hire someone with a background in—" "Someone like you?" Ethan interrupted, his tone sharp. "Someone who understands the financials, but doesn't understand the people we're supposed to be helping?" Bryce's lips thinned, but he didn't argue. Lena's pulse pounded in her ears. She knew what this was. She was being tested. She could feel their skepticism pressing in on her like a weight. Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders. "You're right," she said, looking directly at Bryce. "I don't have experience sitting in boardrooms or handling corporate accounts. But I do know what it's like to need help and not get it. I know what it's like to fall through the cracks. And that's exactly why I'm here." A murmur went around the room. Bryce leaned back in his chair, assessing her. "Then tell us, Ms. Carter, how do you propose we improve our initiatives?" Lena had expected the question, but that didn't make it easier. She steadied herself. "We start by actually listening to the communities we claim to help. Instead of just writing checks, we need to establish real connections, mentorship programs, job training, accessible healthcare partnerships. The money matters, sure, but so does the follow-through." Silence stretched across the room. A few executives exchanged glances, clearly uncertain. Ethan, however, was watching her with something that looked dangerously close to approval. Bryce finally spoke, his voice measured. "That's ambitious." Lena shrugged. "So is Callaway Industries." Another murmur of amusement trickled through the group. Ethan smirked slightly but remained silent, letting her take the lead. Bryce exhaled. "Fine. I'll arrange a budget review. Let's see if your ideas hold up." It wasn't an endorsement, but it wasn't dismissal either. Lena nodded. "Looking forward to it." As the meeting adjourned, Ethan approached her as the others filed out. "Not bad," he said, his voice low. She let out a slow breath. "That was intense," he smirked. "Welcome to my world." Later that afternoon, Lena sat at her new office, a corner space with a view of the city skyline. It still didn't feel real. A knock on the door made her look up. Miranda stepped in, her usual professional demeanor in place. "Not bad in the boardroom today." Lena arched an eyebrow. "You sound surprised." Miranda shrugged, stepping inside. "Most people would have folded under Bryce's scrutiny. You held your own." Lena leaned back in her chair. "Is he always like that?" Miranda's lips curved slightly. "He's protective of the company. He doesn't like unknown factors." "Like me." Miranda tilted her head. "Like anyone who doesn't fit the mold." Lena sighed. "Great." Miranda studied her for a moment before stepping forward and placing a folder on her desk. "If you're serious about this job, you'll need to understand the key players. This is everything you need to know about Callaway Industries' philanthropy division. The projects, the budgets, the partnerships. Study it." Lena glanced at the folder. "Thanks." Miranda nodded, turning to leave, but paused at the door. "By the way, Jamie asked if you'd visit again soon." Lena smiled. "Tell him I'll bring the grilled cheese." Miranda chuckled softly before exiting. That evening, as Lena finally left the office, her mind was still spinning. The day had been overwhelming, exhausting, and slightly terrifying. But as she walked through the busy New York streets, she realized something else. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Lena had survived her first real day in the corporate world. Barely. As she stepped into the Callaway Industries office the next morning, she braced herself for another round of skepticism, dismissive glances, and the exhausting game of proving herself. But instead of focusing on the doubters, she reminded herself why she had taken this job in the first place: Jamie. The boy had nestled his way into her heart far faster than she had expected. And whether or not she fully trusted Ethan, she knew Jamie needed someone in his corner. Her first order of business for the day was diving deeper into the company's existing charitable initiatives. As she combed through the files Miranda had left on her desk the night before, she realized a pattern. Most of the donations were large, impersonal checks sent to major organizations. Very little went into hands-on projects that directly impacted individuals. She frowned, flipping through the reports. For a company of this size and influence, their outreach felt hollow. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Ethan standing in the doorway, looking as collected as ever in a tailored Navy suit. "You look like you're trying to solve a national crisis," he noted dryly, stepping inside. Lena exhaled, tossing a folder onto the desk. "I might be. Your company's philanthropy work is, how do I put this politely, cold. It's all about big checks and press releases. No real human connection." Ethan arched an eyebrow. "It's business, Lena." She shook her head. "That's exactly the problem." He crossed his arms, watching her with quiet intrigue. "What do you suggest?" Lena sat up straighter, her mind racing. "You have the money and resources to do something actually meaningful. What if we focus on community engagement? Partner with local businesses for job training, create mentorship programs, invest in small organizations that don't usually get corporate funding?" Ethan considered her words, his expression unreadable. "That's a significant shift from how we've done things." Lena met his gaze without hesitation. "Exactly. It needs to be." A moment passed before Ethan finally nodded. "Put together a proposal. I want details." Lena blinked. That was easier than she had expected. "You're actually considering this?" His lips twitched. "You wouldn't be here if I wasn't willing to listen." Something in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. But before she could overanalyze it, Ethan continued, "Speaking of changes, Jamie's been asking about you. He wants you to join us for dinner tonight." Lena's heart squeezed. "Are you sure?" Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, as if he wasn't used to extending personal invitations. "Jamie's sure." Lena hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Okay, I'd love to. Ethan's penthouse was everything Lena had imagined, modern, sleek, and enormous. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, and every surface gleamed as if it had been meticulously curated to impress. Despite the lavish surroundings, Jamie greeted her at the door with an excited grin, his wheelchair rolling forward quickly. "You came." Lena ruffled his hair. "Told you I would." "Did you bring grilled cheese?" She laughed. "Not this time, but I'll make it up to you." Ethan appeared, looking more casual than she had ever seen him. He had traded his usual suit for a dark sweater and slacks, but somehow he still radiated power. "Come in," he said, gesturing toward the dining area. Dinner was surprisingly comfortable. Jamie talked animatedly about school, his physical therapy sessions, and his latest obsession, space exploration. Lena listened, laughing at his excitement and chiming in whenever he asked her opinion. Ethan, for the most part, remained quiet, watching their interaction with something Lena couldn't quite read. Halfway through the meal, Jamie's expression turned thoughtful. "Lena, did you always want to work for a big company?" She hesitated, setting her fork down. "Honestly, I wanted to be a teacher." Jamie's eyes widened. "Really? What happened?" Lena exhaled. "Life happened. My mom got sick and I had to drop out of college to take care of her. After she passed, I never really found my way back." A silence stretched across the table. Jamie looked saddened, but Ethan's expression was harder to decipher, something between understanding and guilt. "Sorry," she added quickly. "Didn't mean to bring down the mood." Jamie reached out and squeezed her hand. "It's okay. You're still helping people now." Lena swallowed past the sudden lump in her throat. "I hope so." Ethan spoke then, his voice quieter than usual. "You gave up everything for your family." She shrugged. "That's what you do for the people you love." Something shifted in Ethan's eyes, something raw and unspoken. Lena wondered for the first time what his past looked like beyond the wealth and power. What had he sacrificed? Before she could ask, Jamie yawned, rubbing his eyes sleepily. Ethan stood, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Time for bed." Jamie pouted but didn't argue. "Will you come back soon?" he asked Lena. She smiled. "Of course." Ethan walked Jamie toward his room, leaving Lena alone for a moment. She took in the vast space around her, realizing how empty it felt despite all its luxury. When Ethan returned, he leaned against the doorway, watching her. "You really mean it, don't you?" She raised an eyebrow. "Mean what?" "That it's not about the money." Lena met his gaze without hesitation. "Money's nice, but it's never been what matters most to me." For a long moment they stood in silence, something shifting between them. An understanding. A quiet pull neither of them had expected. Finally, Ethan exhaled, pushing off the wall. "I'll see you at work tomorrow." Lena nodded, grabbing her coat. "See you tomorrow, boss." As she stepped into the elevator and the doors slid shut, she realized her heart was beating faster than it should, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if it was because of the job or the man who had offered it to her. Lena had never seen Ethan rattled. Not once. But as she stepped into his office the next morning, she sensed an undercurrent of tension in the air. Ethan stood by the window, his back to her, phone pressed to his ear. His tone was clipped, sharper than usual. "I don't care what Cross thinks he's entitled to. We'll handle it." Lena froze at the name. She had heard whispers around the office. Damon Cross, a billionaire investor and Ethan's longtime rival. Their feud was the stuff of boardroom legend, a game of corporate chess where the stakes were always billions. She took a careful step forward just as Ethan ended the call. He turned, exhaling slowly when he saw her. "Lena." You okay? She asked, crossing her arms. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. Just business. She raised an eyebrow. The kind of business that makes you look like you're about to put your fist through a wall. His lips twitched slightly, but the amusement didn't reach his eyes. Damon Cross has been circling Callaway Industries for years. He sees every move I make as an opportunity to undercut me. And now? Ethan's jaw tightened. Now he's trying to buy out key stakeholders in our charity division, funneling money into rival initiatives just to weaken our influence. Lena frowned. Why would he care about a charity? Because he doesn't see it as charity, Ethan said. He sees it as leverage. Lena exhaled. So what do we do? We fight, Ethan said simply. But carefully. Something in his tone made her stomach twist. She had learned a lot about Ethan over the past few weeks, and one thing was clear. He played to win. Later that afternoon, Lena attended a high-profile charity gala on behalf of Callaway Industries. It was her first real exposure to the ultra-wealthy world of elite philanthropy, and it was overwhelming. The grand ballroom of the Manhattan venue was filled with New York's most powerful, the air buzzing with the kind of effortless arrogance that came with generational wealth. Lena smoothed her hands down the sleek black dress Miranda had practically forced her to wear. She wasn't used to this. Expensive fabric, high heels that made her feet ache. A room full of people who thought struggling meant waiting too long for their private jets to be refueled. Ethan arrived minutes later, effortlessly commanding the room in his black tux. Heads turned as he walked in, a silent acknowledgement of the power he carried. He was greeted with air kisses and firm handshakes, the kind of respect that came from fear rather than admiration. Lena stuck to the edges of the room, observing, listening, and that's when she saw him. Damon Cross. He was everything she had imagined, tall, impossibly polished, and oozing charm that felt just a little too practiced. Where Ethan's presence was commanding, Damon's was disarming. He was the kind of man who smiled while twisting a knife in your back. And right now, he was walking straight toward her. Lena Carter, he said smoothly, his voice rich with amusement. I've heard quite a bit about you. Lena tensed but kept her expression neutral. Can't say the same. Damon chuckled. Oh, but you will. He gestured toward the room. Ethan is making quite a stir bringing you into his world. A waitress turned executive. It's almost poetic. Lena narrowed her eyes. You say that like it's a bad thing. Not at all, Damon said. I admire bold moves. I make them myself. She didn't trust the smoothness of his tone. What do you want? She asked. Damon's smirk deepened. To offer you a choice. Lena's pulse quickened. What kind of choice? He leaned in slightly. Ethan Callaway has many strengths, but trust isn't one of them. You'll see it soon enough. And when you do, I want you to remember that you have options. Lena stared at him. You're wasting your time. I know exactly what you're doing. Damon chuckled as if her resistance amused him. Do you? Before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. Cross. Ethan appeared at her side, his presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. His tone was cool, but Lena could feel the ice underneath. Damon straightened, smile never faltering. Ethan. Always a pleasure. Ethan didn't return the sentiment. Instead, he placed a hand at the small of Lena's back, a subtle but unmistakable sign of possession. I'd hate to think you were bothering my employee. Damon's smirk remained, but there was something sharper in his gaze. Just a friendly conversation. Ethan didn't blink. Find someone else to be friendly with. A tense silence stretched between them before Damon finally sighed, shaking his head. Shame. I was hoping she'd be more open-minded. Lena held her ground. I make up my own mind, thanks. Damon's gaze flickered with interest before he gave a lazy nod. I'll be seeing you both soon. As he walked away, Ethan's hand pressed a little firmer against Lena's back, guiding her toward a quieter corner of the room. He's dangerous, Ethan murmured. Lena exhaled. No kidding. Ethan studied her for a moment. What did he say to you? She hesitated. That I have options, that you don't trust people. Ethan's jaw clenched. He's trying to manipulate you. I know, she said quietly. But is he wrong? Ethan's expression darkened, something flickering behind his gaze. I don't trust easily, Lena. That's not a secret. Lena searched his face. And do you trust me? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for his glass of bourbon, taking a slow sip before responding. I'm learning. It wasn't quite what she wanted to hear, but it was something. As the night went on, she couldn't shake the feeling that Damon Cross had planted a seed, and despite herself, she wasn't sure if she could ignore it. Lena had never been one to let doubt creep into her mind. She had always trusted her instincts, followed her gut, and made the best decisions she could with the cards she was dealt. But ever since her encounter with Damon Cross, a sliver of unease had lodged itself in her thoughts, refusing to leave. Ethan was a man who didn't trust easily. She had known that from the beginning. But the way he had reacted to Damon's presence, the sharp edge to his tone, the way his fingers had pressed just a little too firmly against the small of her back as if staking a claim, it unsettled her. And now, for the first time, she wondered if she had walked into something far more complicated than she had ever anticipated. The tension only worsened when she arrived at the office the next morning. A hush had settled over the halls of Callaway Industries, the kind that usually preceded something bad. Employees whispered in clusters, their gazes darting toward her before quickly looking away. Her stomach tightened as she made her way to her office. Something wasn't right. Before she could sit down, Miranda appeared at the door, her expression unreadable. Ethan wants to see you. Lena frowned. What's going on? Miranda hesitated. You should hear it from him. That wasn't exactly reassuring. Ethan's office felt colder than usual when she stepped inside. He stood behind his desk, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. But she knew something was wrong the moment his eyes met hers. He was guarded. Sit, he said. Lena hesitated before lowering herself into the chair across from him. Ethan, what's going on? He slid a folder across the desk toward her. There's been a breach. Her heart kicked against her ribs. A breach? Confidential company information has been leaked to a rival firm, Ethan said, his voice controlled but sharp. Specifically details about upcoming charity initiatives, investments, and donor commitments. Lena's stomach sank. And you think I had something to do with it? Ethan didn't answer right away, which only made her pulse pound harder. Finally, he said, the leak came from someone with access to those files. You're one of the few who had that access. Lena's breath caught. You think I sold company secrets? Ethan's jaw clenched. I think you've been spending a lot of time around Damon Cross. Heat flooded her face. Are you serious? He didn't respond. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. Lena shot to her feet, gripping the edge of the desk. I don't know what kind of people you're used to dealing with, but I don't betray the people I work for. His gaze darkened. Then how do you explain this? He reached into the folder and pulled out a printed email transcript. Lena's name was on it. Her email account, her credentials. It showed messages sent to an anonymous recipient, detailing internal company discussions about the charity division. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. This isn't real. The data says otherwise. She shook her head, her voice rising. I didn't send these, Ethan. Someone set me up. His expression remained cold, unreadable. Then explain how your credentials were used. I don't know. Silence filled the space between them, thick and heavy. Lena stared at him, waiting, hoping for him to say something, to show her the trust she thought they had been building. But Ethan remained rigid, his eyes locked onto her like he was analyzing a problem, not a person. The realization hit her like a slap. He didn't trust her, not when it really mattered. The hurt that surged through her was sharp and unexpected. She had been ready to fight for this job, for the opportunity he had given her. But if he truly believed she was capable of betraying him, then what was the point? Lena swallowed hard, then straightened. I don't have to prove my innocence to you. Ethan's expression flickered, but only for a second. Lena, no. She shook her head, taking a step back. You don't trust me, and I can't work for someone who sees me as a liability the second things get complicated. Ethan's lips parted slightly, as if he was about to say something, but she didn't give him the chance. She turned and walked out of his office, keeping her head high even as her chest tightened with the sting of betrayal. By the time she made it outside, the chill of the city air did little to calm her racing thoughts. Miranda caught up with her before she could hail a cab. Lena, wait! Lena turned, biting back the frustration in her voice. What, Miranda? Miranda hesitated, then said carefully, I don't believe you did it. Lena's anger deflated just slightly. Then why is Ethan so quick to believe otherwise? Miranda sighed. Because trust doesn't come easily to him. He's been burned before. Lena crossed her arms. That's not an excuse. I know. Miranda studied her. But if you really didn't do this, then you need to figure out who did. Lena exhaled, glancing up at the towering building she had just walked out of. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted to go back. Ethan sat in his office long after Lena had left, staring at the door she had walked through. Something about the way she had looked at him before she left unsettled him, like he had let her down in a way he wasn't sure he could fix. He reached for the email transcripts again, scanning them for the 100th time. Something didn't sit right. Lena had fought for this job. She had fought for Jamie. Would she really throw that away for a payout from Cross? His grip on the paper tightened. If she was telling the truth, then someone had framed her. And if that was the case, he had just made a terrible mistake. Lena sat in her tiny apartment that night, staring at the ceiling. She should be packing, looking for another job, making plans for what came next. But she couldn't shake the feeling that walking away wasn't the right answer. She had fought her whole life to survive. Maybe it was time she fought for something more. Her phone buzzed. Miranda's name flashed on the screen. Lena hesitated before answering. I think I know who set you up, Miranda said, her voice urgent. And you're not going to like it. Lena sat on the edge of her bed, gripping her phone tightly as Miranda's words echoed in her mind. I think I know who set you up, and you're not going to like it. A cold wave of anger and frustration washed over her. She had spent the last few hours in a haze of disbelief, hurt, and betrayal. But now she just wanted answers. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself. Tell me everything. At the same time, across the city, Ethan Calloway was drowning in silence. His penthouse, normally a place of control and calculated efficiency, felt suffocating. He sat in his office, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, staring at the reports in front of him. He had gone over the leaked documents again and again, looking for something, anything, that would confirm he had made the right decision in confronting Lena. But instead, all he found were questions. The timestamps on the emails didn't line up with her usual working hours. The tone of the messages felt off. Too clinical, too impersonal. And worst of all, The supposed transfer of funds to an undisclosed account had too many inconsistencies. It wasn't adding up. And if it wasn't adding up, that meant he had accused the wrong person. A sharp knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up to see Miranda stepping inside, her face unreadable. "We need to talk." Ethan exhaled. "If this is about Lena—" "It is," Miranda cut in, her tone firm. "And I know who really leaked those files." Ethan sat up straighter, his body tensing. "Who?" Miranda hesitated before sliding a folder onto his desk. "Bryce." Ethan's blood ran cold. Lena paced her tiny apartment as Miranda relayed everything over the phone. Bryce was the only other person who had full access to the charity division's financials, Miranda explained. But he also had something you didn't, a direct connection to Damon Cross. Lena froze. "Bryce is working with Cross?" "Not officially, but he's been feeding him information in exchange for an executive position once Damon finalizes his next merger." Lena's hands clenched into fists. "And Ethan doesn't know?" "He does now." A beat of silence passed before Miranda added, "I confronted him with the evidence. He didn't take it well." Lena scoffed. "Good." She wanted to feel satisfaction, wanted to feel triumphant that Ethan had finally realized his mistake. But all she felt was exhaustion. Ethan had doubted her. He had accused her without hesitation. And that hurt more than anything. Ethan stormed into Bryce's office, slamming the door shut behind him. Bryce barely looked up from his desk. "Something on your mind?" Ethan threw the folder onto the table. "You want to explain this?" Bryce flipped it open, his face remaining infuriatingly calm. "Ah, so you figured it out." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You framed Lena. You set her up to take the fall while you sold information to Cross." Bryce leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled together. "It was nothing personal, Ethan. Just business." Ethan clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay in control. "You sabotaged my company, my employees, and for what? A better title under Cross?" Bryce smirked. "You and I both know how this game works. Loyalty only lasts as long as opportunity. Cross offered me a future. You're too busy chasing after waitresses and pretending you still care about more than profits." Ethan took a slow step forward, his voice dropping dangerously low. "Get out." Bryce raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? You're fired, effective immediately." Bryce scoffed, but there was a flicker of unease in his expression. "You can't fire me without board approval." Ethan smirked, but there was no humor in it. "Watch me." Within minutes, security escorted Bryce out of the building. Ethan stood by his office window, watching as his former CFO disappeared into a waiting car. The damage had been done, and worse, he had let it happen. Now, he had to make it right. Lena was halfway through a glass of wine when there was a knock at her door. She stared at it for a long moment before sighing. "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling." "Lena." Her breath caught at the familiar voice. She hesitated, then finally opened the door. Ethan stood there looking as disheveled as she had ever seen him. His tie was gone, the top buttons of his shirt undone, and for the first time he looked unsure. "I was wrong," he said simply. Lena crossed her arms. "Yeah, no kidding." Ethan exhaled. Bryce was behind the leaks. He's gone now. She searched his face. "And what? You want me to say I told you so? You want me to pretend it doesn't hurt that you didn't even give me a chance to defend myself?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I need you to know that I regret it. Deeply." Lena swallowed the lump in her throat. "Why did you believe it so easily?" He hesitated. "Because I've spent my whole life expecting betrayal. Because I've lost before, and I thought I was losing again." She let out a bitter laugh. That's not an excuse, Ethan. He nodded. I know. He took a cautious step forward. But I want to fix it. Lena's heart pounded. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him again. But trust wasn't something that could be earned back in a single conversation. She took a deep breath. I don't know if I can just go back to how things were. Ethan nodded. I understand. A pause. Then softer. But will you at least let me try? Lena didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied him, the guarded, powerful man who, for the first time, looked uncertain, vulnerable, and maybe, just maybe, worth the risk. Finally, she sighed. You can try, but you're going to have to work for it. A flicker of something passed through Ethan's eyes, something close to relief. I wouldn't expect anything less. Lena had spent years learning how to protect herself from disappointment. Life had never handed her anything easily, and trusting the wrong people had cost her more than once. But as she sat in her apartment, Ethan's words echoing in her head, she realized that this time, this betrayal, had hurt more than most. Because despite everything, she had let herself believe in him. The knock at her door was expected, but it still sent a jolt through her chest. She hesitated before finally pulling it open, revealing Miranda standing on the other side. Mind if I come in? Miranda asked, offering a small, knowing smile. Lena sighed but stepped aside, motioning her in. Let me guess. You're here to convince me to forgive your boss? Miranda chuckled, setting her bag down. Ethan's perfectly capable of fighting his own battles. I'm here for something else. Lena crossed her arms. Which is? Miranda pulled out a file and set it on the coffee table. Proof of everything. Ethan was not a man who made mistakes. He was calculated, controlled, always a step ahead. But this mistake? This one cut deeper than any business deal gone wrong, any financial misstep. Because this mistake had cost him Lena. As he sat in his office poring over the evidence Miranda had compiled, the weight of what he had done settled heavy on his chest. He had been so quick to assume the worst, so blinded by his own trust issues, that he had pushed away the one person who had never asked him for anything except to be seen for who she truly was. And now, she was gone. The intercom on his desk buzzed. Mr. Calloway? His receptionist's voice came through. Damon Cross is here to see you. Ethan stiffened. Send him in. The door swung open, and Damon strode in like he owned the place, his signature smirk firmly in place. Ethan, he greeted smoothly. You look like hell. Ethan didn't bother with pleasantries. What do you want? Damon chuckled, lowering himself into the chair opposite Ethan's desk. I just wanted to see how you were holding up. Losing a good employee is rough, I imagine, especially one as valuable as Lena Carter. Ethan's jaw tightened. If you came here to gloat, don't waste your breath. Damon leaned forward. Oh, I'm not gloating, Ethan. I'm making you an offer. Ethan's eyes narrowed. You really are predictable. Damon smirked. Lena's smart. She's capable. She's wasted here. He tilted his head slightly. You don't appreciate her, but I would. I could give her a position. One where she doesn't have to constantly fight to prove her worth to a man who doesn't trust her. Ethan's grip tightened around the edge of his desk. Damon continued. She deserves better than being a pawn in your world. Ethan's restraint snapped. Get the hell out. Damon didn't flinch. Instead, he rose to his feet, his smirk deepening. I already reached out to her. He adjusted his cufflinks. And let's just say, she didn't immediately say no. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. The idea of Lena, his Lena, working for Damon Cross made his stomach turn. Damon turned to leave but paused at the door. You have no one to blame but yourself. The moment the door shut behind him, Ethan grabbed his phone and dialed. He wasn't losing her. not without a fight. Lena ran her fingers over the documents Miranda had given her, the hard evidence that she had been framed. Every piece of information pointed to Bryce, and worse, showed just how deeply Damon had orchestrated the entire thing. It wasn't just about company secrets. It had been about her, about driving a wedge between her and Ethan. And it had worked. Her phone buzzed. Ethan's name flashed across the screen. She stared at it for a long moment before finally answering. "What do you want, Ethan?" His voice was steady but tense. "We need to talk." She exhaled, gripping the phone. "I'm not interested in hearing excuses." "It's not an excuse," he said. "It's a confession." That gave her pause. She let out a slow breath. "Fine. Meet me somewhere that isn't your ivory tower." They met at a quiet rooftop garden in the city, away from the noise and the eyes of the world that always seemed to watch Ethan Callaway. He was already there when she arrived, standing near the railing, staring out at the skyline. When he turned to face her, she saw something rare in his expression: uncertainty. "I was wrong," he said immediately. "I was wrong, and I don't expect you to forgive me easily, but I need you to know that I hate how I made you feel, and I hate that I let my own issues blind me to who you are." Lena swallowed, crossing her arms. "Do you even realize how much it hurt? How quickly you assumed the worst?" "Yes," Ethan admitted, "and I hate myself for it." She scoffed. "Damon reached out to me, you know." Ethan's expression darkened. "I know." "And?" His hands clenched at his sides. "And if you choose to go work for him, that's your decision." He exhaled sharply. "But I need you to know that I want you to stay. Not because of the company, not because of the job, because I need you in my life, Lena." Her breath caught at the quiet sincerity in his voice. "I don't trust easily," he continued, "but that's not an excuse for what I did. And I swear to you, I will spend every day proving that I can be the man who does trust you." Lena searched his face, looking for hesitation, for doubt. She found none. A long silence stretched between them before she finally spoke. "You hurt me, Ethan." "I know." She took a deep breath, then exhaled. "I don't know if I can just forget what happened." He nodded. "I don't expect you to." Lena bit her lip, then finally sighed. "You're going to have to work really hard to fix this." Ethan let out a small breath of relief, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "That's the one thing I never shy away from." Lena shook her head, a reluctant smile tugging at her own lips. "You're impossible." Ethan stepped closer, his gaze locking onto hers. "But am I forgiven?" She hesitated before answering. "Not yet." His smirk returned, slow and deliberate. "Then I guess I have a lot of work to do." Lena rolled her eyes, but deep down she knew.
Maybe, just maybe, Ethan Callaway was worth the risk. Lena had never been one to hold grudges, but this wasn't something that could be forgotten with a simple apology. Betrayal left wounds, and trust, once broken, wasn't so easily repaired. Ethan had come to her, confessed his mistake, and asked for another chance. But what did that really mean? Would he change? Would he learn to trust her? Or would the next storm shake them apart just as easily? She wasn't sure she wanted to find out. Sitting on the rooftop after Ethan left, she watched the city lights flicker below. This world, his world, was exhausting. It was built on power plays, strategic alliances, and calculated trust. She wasn't sure she had the energy to keep up. Her phone buzzed. Miranda. He fired Bryce, publicly. He's making sure Cross knows he lost this round. Lena stared at the message, then sighed. Ethan always played to win, but some things weren't games. The next morning, Lena woke to the sound of knocking at her door. Groggy, she pulled on a hoodie and opened it, only to find Jamie sitting in his wheelchair, grinning up at her. "Surprise!" Lena blinked, then looked up to see Ethan standing behind him, hands in his pockets. I didn't put him up to this, Ethan said. He insisted. Jamie nodded eagerly. Dad says you might not come back to work. Lena's heart clenched. She crouched beside Jamie, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. I don't know yet, kiddo. Jamie's face fell. But we need you. Lena swallowed hard. I need to think. Jamie's eyes, so full of innocence, searched hers. Then, in a whisper, he said, Do you still like my dad? Lena's breath caught in her throat. She turned her gaze to Ethan, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. That's complicated, she murmured. Jamie sighed dramatically. Adults always say that. Lena laughed despite herself, but before she could respond, Ethan stepped forward. Jamie, why don't you go inside for a second? I need to talk to Lena alone. Jamie pouted, but rolled inside without argument. Ethan took his place, standing in the doorway, looking like a man who had run out of ways to fix what he had broken. I know I messed up, he said. I know I hurt you. Lena exhaled. Ethan, I don't want to lose you, he cut in, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. Not just at Callaway Industries, not just in Jamie's life. I don't want to lose you. Lena crossed her arms, trying to protect herself from the weight of his words. I don't know if I can go back to how things were. Ethan stepped closer. Then let's build something better. Lena's heart pounded. You don't get to just say the right words and expect everything to be fine. He ran a hand through his hair, looking almost vulnerable. I don't expect that. I need to show you. I've spent my entire life pushing people away. I don't want to push you away, Lena. Not anymore. Lena searched his face, looking for hesitation, for doubt. She found none. For the first time, Ethan Callaway wasn't the untouchable billionaire, the ruthless businessman, or even the man she had once admired from a distance. He was just Ethan, standing in front of her, asking for another chance. And that terrified her. The following week, Lena didn't return to Callaway Industries, but she didn't accept Damon Cross's offer either. She needed space. Time to think. Jamie called her every day. Ethan didn't. But he sent messages, not asking her to come back, not demanding anything, just small things. A recommendation for a book he thought she'd like, a text saying Jamie had aced a school project, a message saying he hoped she was okay. It was the first time she had seen a side of Ethan that wasn't about control. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was something. One evening, Lena found herself outside Ethan's penthouse, nerves twisting in her stomach. She knocked before she could talk herself out of it. Ethan opened the door almost instantly, like he had been waiting. Lena took a deep breath. I have conditions. His lips quirked, but he didn't interrupt. I come back on my terms, she continued. I don't want to be treated like a charity case. I want real authority in the outreach programs, and I want to work with people who actually care, not just ones looking for a tax write-off. Ethan nodded. Done. Lena narrowed her eyes. You agreed too fast. His smirk deepened. Because I meant it, she exhaled. And if you ever doubt me like that again, I won't. Lena studied him. How do you know? Because I can't afford to lose you twice. The words hit her like a slow burn. For a long moment they just stood there, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Finally, Ethan stepped aside. Stay for dinner. Lena hesitated, then smiled slightly. You cooking? He smirked. I ordered from the diner. Lena laughed, stepping inside. Maybe this wasn't a perfect ending. Maybe this wasn't even a fresh start. But for the first time, it felt like something real. Lena hadn't expected her life to change so drastically in a matter of weeks. She had gone from scraping by at a diner to being entangled in the world of billionaires, betrayals, and second chances. But despite the whirlwind, despite the chaos, she had come to realize one thing. She wasn't the same woman who had hesitated when Ethan Callaway first offered her a job. She had been afraid then. She wasn't anymore. The first morning back at Callaway Industries felt different. The curious stares from employees no longer fazed her, and the hushed whispers about her dramatic departure didn't shake her confidence. She wasn't here for them. She was here to make a difference. As she stepped into her office, Miranda was already waiting. "You're late," Miranda quipped, arms crossed, but there was something almost approving in her gaze. Lena smirked. "I needed coffee." Miranda handed her a folder. "You'll need more than caffeine. Ethan already approved your new outreach initiatives. Looks like you're making waves." Lena blinked. "Wait, he approved them? All of them?" Miranda nodded. "No revisions, no pushback. He said, and I quote, 'If Lena thinks it's the right move, then it's the right move.'" Something warm flickered in Lena's chest. Ethan wasn't just saying he trusted her, he was proving it. By midday, Lena found herself in a strategy meeting, presenting the new direction for Callaway Industries' charity division. It was the first time she wasn't nervous, speaking in front of a room full of powerful executives. "This company has spent years writing checks," she said, making eye contact with every person in the room. "That's not enough. Real change happens when we get involved. That means mentorship programs, direct partnerships with small nonprofits, and hands-on community work." Bryce's replacement, a no-nonsense woman named Vanessa Green, folded her hands. "That's ambitious." Lena smiled. "So is this company." Ethan, seated at the head of the table, smirked slightly but said nothing. He let her lead. And that, more than anything, told Lena she had made the right decision coming back. That evening, Jamie burst into Ethan's office, his wheelchair rolling fast. "Dad! Lena! Look what I made!" He proudly held up a sketch, a rough but adorable drawing of the three of them. Ethan in a suit, Lena holding a plate of grilled cheese, and Jamie in his chair with a cape. Lena laughed, ruffling his hair. "I love it." Ethan studied the drawing, something unreadable passing through his gaze. "You gave me a cape." Jamie shrugged. "You're kind of like a superhero. You just don't always know it." Ethan's lips twitched. "I don't think I've ever been called that before." Jamie turned to Lena. "And you're the one who helps him figure out the hero stuff." Lena's heart squeezed. She looked at Ethan, who was already watching her. "I think he's onto something," Ethan murmured. Lena swallowed hard. "Jamie's pretty smart." Jamie yawned, his excitement fading into exhaustion. Ethan scooped him up effortlessly. "Bedtime." Jamie pouted but didn't argue. As Ethan carried him toward the door, Jamie mumbled, "Lena should tuck me in too." Ethan hesitated, then looked back at her. "Up for it?" Lena's chest tightened. It was just a small request, but it felt like so much more. She nodded. "Yeah, I'd love to." Later that night, after Jamie was tucked in and sound asleep, Ethan and Lena stood on the balcony of the penthouse, the city lights stretching endlessly before them. Ethan leaned against the railing, looking unusually relaxed. "I never thought I'd get a second chance to do things differently." Lena crossed her arms. "With Jamie?" "With everything." He turned to her. "With you." Her breath hitched. "Ethan, I don't want to push," he said, "but I need you to know something." She braced herself. "What?" Ethan reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I don't just need you in my company or in Jamie's life. I need you, Lena." Her pulse pounded. "Ethan, I'll wait," he said, his voice soft but sure. "For as long as it takes." Lena searched his face, and for the first time, she saw it. The man behind the power, the control, the walls he had built around himself. She exhaled slowly. "I think I might be worth the wait." Ethan's smirk was slow, genuine. "I already know you are." And for the first time in a long time, Lena wasn't afraid of what came next. Lena hadn't expected her life to change so drastically in a matter of weeks. She had gone from scraping by at a diner to being entangled in the world of billionaires, betrayals, and second chances. But despite the whirlwind, despite the chaos, she had come to realize one thing. She wasn't the same woman who had hesitated when Ethan Callaway first offered her a job. She had been afraid then. She wasn't anymore.
The first morning back at Callaway Industries felt different. The curious stares from employees no longer fazed her, and the hushed whispers about her dramatic departure didn't shake her confidence. She wasn't here for them. She was here to make a difference. As she stepped into her office, Miranda was already waiting. "You're late," Miranda quipped, arms crossed. But there was something almost approving in her gaze. Lena smirked. I needed coffee. Miranda handed her a folder. You'll need more than caffeine. Ethan already approved your new outreach initiatives. Looks like you're making waves. Lena blinked. Wait, he approved them? All of them? Miranda nodded. No revisions, no pushback. He said, and I quote, if Lena thinks it's the right move, then it's the right move. Something warm flickered in Lena's chest. Ethan wasn't just saying he trusted her, he was proving it. By midday, Lena found herself in a strategy meeting, presenting the new direction for Callaway Industries' charity division. It was the first time she wasn't nervous speaking in front of a room full of powerful executives. This company has spent years writing checks, she said, making eye contact with every person in the room. That's not enough. Real change happens when we get involved. That means mentorship programs, direct partnerships with small nonprofits, and hands-on community work. Bryce's replacement, a no-nonsense woman named Vanessa Green, folded her hands. That's ambitious. Lena smiled. So is this company. Ethan, seated at the head of the table, smirked slightly but said nothing. He let her lead, and that, more than anything, told Lena she had made the right decision coming back. That evening, Jamie burst into Ethan's office, his wheelchair rolling fast. Dad, Lena, look what I made. He proudly held up a sketch, a rough but adorable drawing of the three of them. Ethan in a suit, Lena holding a plate of grilled cheese, and Jamie in his chair with a cape. Lena laughed, ruffling his hair. I love it. Ethan studied the drawing, something unreadable passing through his gaze. You gave me a cape. Jamie shrugged. You're kind of like a superhero. You just don't always know it. Ethan's lips twitched. I don't think I've ever been called that before. Jamie turned to Lena. And you're the one who helps him figure out the hero stuff. Lena's heart squeezed. She looked at Ethan, who was already watching her. I think he's onto something, Ethan murmured. Lena swallowed hard. Jamie's pretty smart. Jamie yawned, his excitement fading into exhaustion. Ethan scooped him up effortlessly. Bedtime. Jamie pouted but didn't argue. As Ethan carried him toward the door, Jamie mumbled, Lena should tuck me in too. Ethan hesitated, then looked back at her. Up for it? Lena's chest tightened. It was just a small request, but it felt like so much more. She nodded. Yeah, I'd love to. Later that night, after Jamie was tucked in and sound asleep, Ethan and Lena stood on the balcony of the penthouse, the city lights stretching endlessly before them. Ethan leaned against the railing, looking unusually relaxed. I never thought I'd get a second chance to do things differently. Lena crossed her arms. With Jamie? With everything. He turned to her. With you. Her breath hitched. Ethan, I don't want to push, he said, but I need you to know something. She braced herself. What? Ethan reached out, gently taking her hand in his. I don't just need you in my company or in Jamie's life. I need you, Lena. Her pulse pounded. Ethan, I'll wait, he said, his voice soft but sure. For as long as it takes. Lena searched his face, and for the first time she saw it. The man behind the power, the control, the walls he had built around himself. She exhaled slowly. I think I might be worth the wait. Ethan's smirk was slow, genuine. I already know you are. And for the first time in a long time, Lena wasn't afraid of what came next. Lena had spent her entire life making choices out of necessity. Survival had always dictated her path, leaving little room for dreams or risks. But standing on Ethan's balcony that night, looking into the eyes of the man who had once doubted her but had since fought to prove her wrong, she realized something. This time, she had a choice. And for the first time, it wasn't about survival. It was about love. The next few weeks passed in a blur of late nights at the office, meetings with nonprofit leaders, and quiet evenings spent with Jamie. Callaway Industries' charity division was thriving, but more importantly, Lena was thriving. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something meaningful, something lasting. And Ethan? He never pushed. He let her set the pace, let her decide what she wanted. But he was always there, steady, patient, waiting for her to be ready. One evening, as Lena packed up her office, she heard a soft knock on the door. She looked up to find Ethan leaning against the frame, his sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened. "Busy?" he asked, smirking. She chuckled. "Always." He stepped inside, his presence filling the room effortlessly. "I have something for you." Lena raised an eyebrow as he pulled a sleek envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. She hesitated before opening it, her breath catching as she read the words inside. The Carter Scholarship Fund, full tuition grant for Lena Carter. Her heart pounded. "Ethan, what is this?" He studied her, his expression unreadable. "It's your second chance." She swallowed hard, overwhelmed. You gave up your dream once for someone you loved," he said softly. "But now I want you to have the choice to chase it again." Tears burned in her eyes. "Ethan, I don't need—" "I know you don't," he interrupted. "That's what makes this different." He stepped closer, tilting her chin up gently. "I don't want to change your life, Lena. I just want to be in it, however you'll have me." Her walls crumbled. All the fear, all the hesitation, gone. Because Ethan Callaway wasn't just offering her a future, he was offering her a choice. And for the first time, she didn't need to think about it. She closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his. Ethan responded instantly, his arms wrapping around her, holding her like she was something precious, something irreplaceable. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, his breath uneven. "So, does this mean you're done making me wait?" Lena laughed softly. "I think you've waited long enough." His smirk returned, slow and victorious. "Good." She shook her head, smiling. "You're impossible." Ethan grinned. "You love me for it." And as she looked up at him, at the man who had gone from an untouchable billionaire to someone willing to fight for her, she realized something else. She did. She really, truly did. And this time, she wasn't afraid to say it. Months later, Lena stood at the podium of the first annual Carter Scholarship Gala, a room full of young women before her, women who, like her, had once thought their dreams were out of reach. Ethan stood in the audience, Jamie at his side, both of them watching her with pride. She took a deep breath and smiled. Second chances change lives. They certainly changed mine. As applause filled the room, Lena met Ethan's gaze, and for the first time in her life she knew. She had found where she belonged, with him, with Jamie, with the life she had chosen, and she had never been happier.